Title: Arsonist's Lullabye. Written by Ryomen. Once upon a time, a king stumbled upon what remained of his long-lost lover. The smell of smoke clouded the air, filling the lungs of the corpses as the fire ravaged them until all that was left was ash. Yet, even as the inferno drew ever near you, you made no move to leave your work. Not even the presence of a hell unto himself could make the archivist move from their desk. Should they look up, they'd be met with the sight of the cliff, the doors opening onto the seaside view of the Lord's house. Though the sky was red with smoke, and the air stank of rotting flesh, scorched meat and salt. I know you were there. You aren't exactly being subtle, he said, reaching for another jar of ink as your brush ran dry. The journal before you wasn't much in terms of a relic, but it needed to be transcribed before it was too late. There really wasn't much of a point in it either. It's just like you would be reduced to ash within the hour. The sound of your voice was met with nothing but cruel laugh. The snarl that followed one that should have struck fear into your heart. It should have impaled your senses in one swift strike as the stake was driven into the witch's heart, rendering her last struggle futile. But it didn't, and it only angered the demon. Why? Why aren't you afraid? The question was more of a demand, really. One from the curse that stood in the door to the archives. It was a vast room. It had no window other than the doors before you and what little light there was in the depths of the archives. Only come from the occasional candle. Should the rest of the room be illuminated, it would have drawn attention to the rows upon rows of scrolls, notes, letters, stories, statements, each in such great detail as it described those terrible things known as curses, etching their stains and fear that they sowed into the crop of humanity down to the most minuscule of things, because there is no point to fear without eloquence. You spoke your attention more focused on each thin stroke of your brush as you traced the ink of kanji into the parchment, every character defined in a picturesque calligraphy which brought out a great pride of yours. I mean not to say that is, you continued as his presence grew in near tenfold. If you turn around now, you'd have been met with the sight of the curse staring down at you with ferocity most would have dropped dead from on the spot. One of his hands was already in your throat, and while his fingers had yet to wrap around the thing, the sharp point of his claw-like nails already breaking the skin of your neck. The presence of the oh-so-esteemed King of Curses is one to be mocked. I do not intend that by any stretch of the matter. But fear isn't an emotion that means much to you when the documentation of it marks the point of your entire continuous and tired existence. Oh, and pray to tell, why is that? Sukuna's voice was mocking, his word sharp, and should you misstep and fall, you'd find that they would offer no support, only cutting through your fingers as you reach for any hold to prevent you from falling from where you stood already so far below him. I am the archivist, you said, swirling your brush into the small glass of water. I document and record fear. That is my job. I think I was once a human, though I've forgotten if those really were my memories or just another statement. I have so many, you know. Sukuna stood staring at the back of your head in the dust. Two of his arms lay folded across his chest, while the third rested against his hip as he let the hand so close to crushing your throat fall back to his side. The blaze of the rest of the great house was almost at the archive, and there was no fun in killing it when it brought no fear with it. Even curses carried the fear of slaughter, and anyone, regardless of whether it was a human or a curse of something in between, felt it. Any who didn't were simply too foolish for their own good. Romantics who loved and empathized with those monsters who'd crush their hearts for fun, and grandiose fools who thought they were above the level of the gods who walked the earth, breathing nothing but fear and hatred. There was that want, of course, to lunge forward and plunge his fingers through the pathetic flesh of your neck as blood coated his fist with the warmth he's grown to love, as the addictive scent of iron and death filled his senses. though he restrained himself. Perhaps it was because this stranger sounded so much like them. Perhaps why he made despair the archivist. You took a little note of this pathetic kindness of his. Rather than getting to your feet as though nothing strange had happened, turning around, you faced him briefly, and had he any heart left in that empty cavern of his chest, it would have stopped beating in that instant, because it wasn't that you sounded like them. It was more so that you were them. There had been a time in which Sukuna had been human. There had been a time in which you were human. But eyes that were once filled with an honest and shy adoration were filled with nothingness, so grand that he felt as though he might see everything reflected back at him through the jeweled irises. Long lashes blinked at him as the six eyes studied him carefully. When the word left his mouth in a sort of nostalgia that made anger seep into his tone. Because how dare you live here in secret, when he was left to rot in the filth and disgust of Bat, where the mess and muck got under his skin until it coated his very soul with a grime so thick it was impossible to wipe away, baked unto the core of his very being from the heat of slaughter. And yet here you stood. The scars that lined your face blinded two of your eyes. The deep scratches embedded into your flesh alongside the puncture wounds that had burrowed into your skin. It was a terrible sight. The blinded eyes were slashed and matted together before the white film was drawn around the mess that had become your irises. As you raised a hand, he witnessed another eye open its lid to gaze at him dully from the palm of your hand. The black clothing you wore was almost akin to a funeral garb, that which fell over your figure in flowing velvet shadows, blending into your own so much that it might as well have been a part of it. I'm sorry. Your voice was smooth, like warm honey, flowing over him in its sweet undertones, rooting the great curse in place, unable to move without dragging the residue of your unfinished words with him. I don't know how that is. I am simply the archivist. Liar. Sukuna hissed, surging forward, grabbing you by the throat as he shoved you against your desk. A bottle of ink fell onto the ground as you slammed against the thing, his fingers digging through your flesh with ease. How dare you hide away from me? How dare you make me mourn for your death, only to lay in the shadows of some lowly shaman? He bellowed, shaking as he spoke, true from anger or grief. I'll allow you to decide. I have no memories of my time before being the archivist. You barely manage to croak out before you speak. Should you speak any more, you felt like your vocal cords might snap from the pressure of the curse above you. He spat at your feet, tossing you aside, scattering paper and ink onto the ground, though it was more than clear he didn't care in the slightest about that. How was this possible? He'd seen what they have done to you. You, his queen, who he loved and treasured only for those damned shaman to steal you away, a stake through the heart of the witch. By no means was it an easy sight, but to break through the infinity and blind the six-eyed goddess was by no means a simple feat, though by the time he made it to your side, hands soaked in blood and mouth tasting of something foul, though what it was he couldn't name. Perhaps it's what loss tasted like. But he watched as the curse tried to pick herself up, falling once before getting to your feet, overgrown and matted hair, eyes bruised with lack of rest, and while the aura of power that had always marked you was still there, it had died from a raging fire to nothing but a few remaining embers. It was nothing but a husk. No, not quite. Instead of an inferno, you'd been reduced to a mere candle in comparison, and while the flame still burned all the same, it paled in comparison to the ferocity it had once been. Was this what grief was like? Was this the feeling gnawing at what was left of his heart as he watched you resume your seat? I am a curse, yes, and once I was even human. But first and foremost, I am the archivist. My archive is burning. I would ask you that you allow me to burn with it." Your voice was calm, steady, emotionless, though he didn't miss how the hands that gripped at the fabric of your garments shook with what might have been fear. "No, this was wrong. This wasn't how a miracle like this was supposed to go. He didn't deserve a miracle, that much was for certain. He didn't deserve the relief and love of the return of his love. Both his and their soul had been so filled with contempt, with hate, with lust for violence and an adoration of slaughter, and pride in the fear they created. Monsters in their own right, but behind closed doors, where vulnerability was allowed, an almost soft nature to seep into the cracks of their beings. So wrapped up in each other, they would have let the world burn with ease if that was what it took to illuminate the other. But as the fire crept through the room, the smell of ash and desolation thickened in the air, and Sukuna found himself rooted to the ground, unable to move. You made no effort to leave or to flee, even as the flames crawled up your being and consumed your whole. Eating away at your flesh, as muscles burned off your bones and blood became nothing but steam. The archivist you'd called yourself, yet how on earth you'd come to a place such as this was beyond him. Why the shamans held you within the walls of their oh-so-steamed headquarters. Why they allowed you to stay and why you remained within the confines of that archives was beyond him. And in any answers to that questions thundering in his mind, were numbed by the screaming of whatever remained of his heart as it begged for him to save what might be his last chance of love. And still, he could not move, for what had once been his lover was no more. And he could only watch as what should have been a miracle burned before him. It was not a happy ending.